Hello, everyone, and welcome to this podcast on academic skills. Today, we're just going to chat a bit about that and a bit about our experiences at uni, and hopefully give you some tips to help you on your journey. So, just a quick introduction. My name's Bethan. I'm going into my fourth year of film and media, and this is Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan, and I'm going into my fourth year of business management.
And we're both also PAL students, so just a quick brief explanation of that. That's peer-assisted learning, and we conduct sessions where we help students in lower years consolidate their learning that they've done in lectures and seminars through a variety of activities and just Q&As and things like that. So today we're going to chat about academic skills and just a bit about how we've experienced that through uni and what that maybe means for you as well, and how to maybe go about that in starting your first assignments. So we've done it in a kind of step-by-step guide. So I think, first of all, is when you get your question, it's important to interpret it and decide how you're going to tackle it. So when you get that essay question or a variety of essay questions, you'll look at them, you'll read them through, and they'll be probably quite long depending on your course. Sometimes they can be simple and straightforward, but usually it asks you to do either one or two things, maybe a couple of other extras in the background. They might ask you to contextualize whatever it is you're talking about, might ask you to do some background research, and then it might ask you to answer or analyze a particular element that you've been studying. So once you've picked that, it's important to make sure that you include all of that within your essay. So if it asks you to do two things, you need to do the two things, because there's nothing worse than when the lecturers read your essay and they discover that you haven't done the background research for it that was asked in the question. It might seem obvious, but when you're in essay mode, sometimes you can forget to do that. And I think it's also important that when you first get your question, you plan out what you're going to do, which we'll get a bit more into, I think, as we go. But once you've done that, it's a good idea just to plan when exactly you're going to say everything, what you think might be included in your essay. And this might change as you go along, because sometimes when you do planning, it doesn't actually work out within your essay. It's a good idea to maybe plan out first and get a good structure going. And then if that does change along the line, it doesn't really matter. I don't know if you have any more tips for interpreting questions, Megan.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think it's important that when you do get an assignment question, you really look at it and decide what are the main things that it's asking you to do. And what I always like to do is I like to write out the question and pick out different themes and the different parts that make up that question that I'm going to further investigate. Planning, that's also really important to make sure that you are addressing the assignment brief and exactly what the question is asking you, and sort of making sure that you're going to get as many marks as you can. So planning is definitely an important part of academic skills.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the next point on from that would be research. And research obviously is going to take up the bulk of your time, and it really is the backbone of your assignment.
Yeah, so after you have broken down your question into the relevant parts, you're probably going to find that research is the next step. And what I like to do is when I'm reading an article or a bit of text in a book or website, something that I've identified as something that I want to further research and something that's valuable to my assignment, I'll keep a note of the citation and reference just there and then. And I think sort of keeping track of all your sources and a personal bibliography is really important to make sure that you're not leaving anything out. You're making sure that you're keeping track of exactly what you're reading and where it's coming from. And I always like to keep a note of the reference, what it says within that piece of text, and I then make a comment about it. So how it relates to your topic or assignment question, and that can also be useful when you're trying to be critical. You're actually making a comment on maybe how relevant it is to your question, maybe how you're going to use it, and then because you're doing this research and you're carrying out this research and you're structuring your research in that way, for me, I find it's a lot easier to then figure out how I'm going to structure my essay or how I'm going to structure my report.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think for me, the big one is keeping track of your sources as you go. and luckily I've never really experienced this too much, but there's nothing worse than getting to the end of your essay and then realizing that you haven't like properly sourced half of what you've been referencing, and you need to go back and you need to do this whole bibliography last minute, and it's just not a good idea. Referencing is a really easy way to pick up marks because it's a whole section of the marking scheme is how you've referenced and how your bibliography looks. So it's really important that you maybe do that as you go along, especially because sources can become lost as well. Like you might think you'll remember what source this is, but you'll come back to it in a couple of days and you'll completely forget. So at least keep a note or keep a bookmark tab or something, however you want to go about it, but definitely make sure that you still have all your sources with you. And I think definitely making a wee note about what the source is for, because this is something that I always mess up on, is not remembering what I'm going to use this source for. So I'll have the source, then I'll come back to it later and then realize that I have no idea what this is relevant to. So I like putting the source in the paragraph where I'm going to use it, or maybe having a little note saying, oh, this is to do with this topic. Just a couple of words would be easy enough. But yeah, definitely keep your sources neat and keep them ongoing as you write your essay or assignment.
Maybe we should talk about how to identify if a source or a piece of information is reliable, and maybe what questions to ask yourself to evaluate these sources.
So yeah, there's definitely a lot of different sources that you'll use in your time at university. But I think the main two for all courses pretty much will be books and journals. These are academic sources. Majority of the time, you'll find them all in the library or online, or on the online library. And these are some of your best sources that you can use for essays because they're guaranteed to be academic. They'll have a lot of materials within them, particularly journal articles can get really specific into your topic. So if you know what you're searching for, I would recommend looking for journal articles, particularly online. You'll find the best ones there. You'll also maybe use a lot of websites as well. And obviously this is a very kind of grey area. You need to be really careful what websites you're citing, because typically if you're looking for online stuff, it'll be journal articles online, like newspaper journalists and things like that. So definitely make sure that the sources are coming from a reliable website, or at least a website that's safe, or is not maybe completely like fake news and things like that, unless that's the topic of your discussion. It's okay to be opinionated as long as that's relevant towards the assignment, but you need to make sure that you're having a good discussion within it as well from your own voice. So yeah, I think definitely making sure that your sources are reliable. Obviously, there's key things to avoid as well within that.
Yeah. So you probably know that Wikipedia isn't something that the university will want you to cite in your text. But a good couple of things to consider when you're evaluating a piece of text to determine if it is reliable would be asking yourself questions like, is the info current? Also, if what's the purpose of the text? Is the purpose of the text to inform, persuade? Is it to sell you something, for example? And looking at the date of publication could also be a good idea. You know, has it been published recently? Is the information outdated? Um, for my business management degree, it's not a bad thing if you're citing information that someone has maybe disagreed on or disputed years later, but as long as you're commenting on that, and that also shows that you're thinking critically and making links between the literature as well. So again, that's where keeping track of your references and making a wee comment on it can be useful, because it allows you to make links between the literature as well.
So again, just make sure that you understand your question, you understand what kind of sources you should be looking for. And yeah, as you said, I think it's important to critically evaluate your sources within the essay majority of the time as well. So it's okay to use a source that you maybe disagree with or perhaps goes against your argument in some way, as long as you evaluate it. So don't obviously contradict yourself within your essay, but you can say, this is what this person said, however, this isn't relevant to what I'm discussing, or however, this has been disputed by this other source, which I think's a good tool to use. I always like to use two sources that kind of argue against each other, because again, it shows that you've been reading critically and you're arguing critically as well.
Yeah. And I think the last sort of points that we wanted to include under academic skills is some study skill tips.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that relates to what we were saying earlier about the importance of planning is starting early with these assignments. So I always find if I do just a little bit every day, then the task is much less daunting than starting, 2 weeks before the due date. So as soon as I get the assignment brief, I would recommend to just read it through as soon as you get it, and keeping a diary and putting the dates of the assignment due dates in really helps me as well, because it allows me to work out how much time I need to complete each part of the assignment. And instead of looking at it as this big deadline, I also like to give myself smaller deadlines within that assignment date. So if
Mm-hmm.
there's a certain part that needs to be done, I might say, right, I need all my research to be done by this date. I would like my introduction to be finished by this date. So it sort of gives you smaller goals that you can work towards rather than this big, scary goal.
Yeah, I think that's definitely good advice. Another thing, like you said, definitely read the question as soon as it comes out, even if you're not planning to maybe start then. It's just a good way to get your brain flowing, get a good way to decide what exactly you're going to focus on, or maybe what you will be saying within the essay or assignment. And then, yeah, I think your first port and call will probably be to collect your sources or start collecting some sources, start doing some research. So maybe put in some planning for that early on, and then you can get your planning down next, exactly what you're going to say. You might do some more research afterwards as well, and then you can start on your maybe introduction, the main body. Some people like to start with the main bodies as well, the main body paragraphs. So you might end up doing paragraph one before you do your actual introduction, because your introduction and your conclusion need to contextualize what you're going to say in the whole essay or what you have said in your conclusion. So it might be a good idea to start with the middle parts if you find that easier, and then you can make sure that your entire essay flows completely, that everything's linked, that you've said, that you've answered in within the main body text what you've actually set out to do in your introduction as well, and then your conclusion should reflect that as well. And also you can also continue to evaluate in your conclusion, maybe say that there were some things that you found different, to what you were expecting, or that some sources disagreed with your points, things like that. But just make sure that you've backed up everything. I think that's the main thing we can say. And when you're doing time management within that, definitely make sure that you've got the time to plan all this out. And then if you do it in stages, it definitely makes it a lot easier, I find.
Yeah, I think setting out the time to study, without any phone or distractions, and sort of force yourself to get started. As I always feel starting is really the hardest part when you've got this big heap of work to do. So
Yeah.
just getting the ball rolling and actually forcing yourself to get started and making a plan as well, I find can be really motivating.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thanks for listening to our academic skills podcast, and we hope you found it useful.